Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. If you would, please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is it on now? Yes. This time we'd like to introduce the board members, starting to my right.
Jim Hilly,
Walt Recook,
Gary Willis.
Christopher Bluer.
Todd Chernick.
The Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-legal board composed of resident volunteers of the City of Milton. The board is charged with hearing requests for variances from the standards of the zoning ordinance and appeals of administrative determinations. With regard to decisions on primary variances, the board's basis for decisions is provided by these four considerations. A, relief if granted would not offend the spirit or intent of the ordinance. And B, there are such extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property that the literal or strict application of the ordinance would create an unnecessary hardship due to size, shape, or topography, or other extraordinary and exceptional situations or conditions not caused by the variance applicant. And C, relief if granted would not cause substantial detriment to the public good and surrounding properties. And D, that the public safety, health, and welfare are secured and a substantial justice is done. At this time, is there any changes to the amendment of the agenda or any adoptions? We need a motion to. Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the proposed agenda for the July 15, 2014 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of adopting the July 15, 2014 agenda, raise your right hand. Same side, passed unanimously.
Mention which ones are deferred. Particular one at the bottom.
We need approval of the June meeting minutes. Yes, sir?
No, sir, I don't believe I was present.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion for approval of the minutes for the June Board of Zoning Appeals meeting.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the June 2014 meeting minutes, raise your right hand.
I abstain.
We have one that abstains. Christopher Moore. Angela, according to this agenda, we have 3 cases tonight and 2 have been deferred. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The first one is V14001 to allow recreation court to encroach in the 50-foot setback. Would you please present?
Since V14011, after the applicant went before the design review board, they suggested some things to her, some more information and some other options for the location of the court. So we are asking that that case be deferred to the next meeting.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to defer?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to defer V14-011 to the August 2014 meeting.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor of deferring V14-001 to the August 2014 meeting, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Passed unanimously. V14-012 to reduce the 50-foot buffer to 10 feet in order to add parking. Angela, will you please present?
Yes, sir. The site, 15800 Birmingham Highway, is the location of the Birmingham Village Commercial Center, located on the southwest corner of Hickory Flat Road and Birmingham Highway. It is zone MIX per 2004 Z0116. The current owner, Leonard Jacklett, purchased the last 2 available offices from Armstrong Development in February of 2013. When the buildings were purchased, Armstrong Development required licensed parking for all buildings. The licensed parking agreement assigned to these buildings consisted of 13 parking spaces with 2 handicap parking spaces for a total of 15. At the time of purchase, Mr. Jacklet assumed that the parking would be adequate. Section 64-1410 requires 2.8 spaces for each 1,000 square foot of office space. With a total of 11,792 square feet, these two buildings would require 33 parking spaces. The owner feels that more parking is required in order to promote any future sales or leases of office space. Staff notes that the entire development consists of approximately 23,881 square feet of office space. This would require 67 parking spaces per current parking requirements. There are approximately 76 spaces on the property currently. For section 64-237, a 50-foot undisturbed buffer is required adjacent to AG1 property along the west side of the property line. The property adjacent to the west property line is zoned AG1 and includes an unoccupied house and barn. The applicant proposes to reduce the buffer to 10 feet. In this space, he proposes to add 19 parking spaces. This will provide his buildings a total of 34 spaces. He will also add a 5-foot sidewalk between buildings 100 and 200 for ease of access to the new parking. The applicant has stated that no commercial vehicles will be parked in the new parking area. Because Mr. Jacklet proposes to reduce the 50-foot buffer to 10 feet in order to accommodate this new parking area, a variance is required. On July 8, 2014, the DRB offered the following comments. Flip the parking so that it is adjacent to the buildings. Use pervious pavers. A tree island is required per every 5 spaces. Meet with the adjacent property owner to work out any issues. Staff held a focus meeting on July 7, 2014, at which the following comments were provided. Building plan review, no comments. Site plan review. The applicant will need to comply with stormwater regulations. Arborist. The area requested in the variance was previously landscaped per buffer requirements and is presently functioning to meet that requirement. If a variance is granted, staff recommends the entire area adjacent to AG1 should be revegetated as much as practical and in such a way to provide screening between the two uses, as well as being planted to screen as much as possible from Hickory Flat Road. 2, relocate parking spaces towards the buildings. 3, install 2 additional parking islands. 4, parking lots should be of a pervious material. 5, no utilities in parking islands or parking bays. And 6, 1 2-inch caliper canopy shade tree shall be installed in each parking bay and or island. DOT stormwater. The applicant shall submit a stormwater concept plan to Jim Seba prior to submitting for an LDP. And standards for consideration. The standards were read earlier, and the applicant responds as follows. The current parking situation has provided an extreme hardship for the owner to not be able to sell or lease any of the office space efficiently in the 2 buildings. The additional parking would be in the rear of the buildings and will have no effect on surrounding property owners adjacent to the property. The remaining 10 feet of the landscape buffer will include existing mature trees that will remain, and additional underplantings will be added. Also, the existing tree screening on the north and south side of the proposed parking will not be altered. This will allow there to be no visual impact from Hickory Flat Road or the adjoining property. The neighbors in the area will have no adverse effect on their property from a visual perspective or from any driving conditions. Recommended conditions. Should the board choose to approve the application, staff recommends the following conditions. The new parking area shall be made of a pervious material. Parking lot, tree islands, plantings, etc. to meet ordinance requirements. Landscape plan shall be per the approval of the city arborist. The buffer area shall be revegetated in order to provide screening from the adjacent property as well as Hickory Flat Road. The buffer planning plan shall be per the approval of the city arborist. And also staff wanted to add no commercial vehicles shall be parked in the new parking area. This concludes the staff presentation.
Any questions from the board to staff?
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
On that last recommended condition on the commercial vehicles, is that intended to be no overnight parking?
No storage. No storage of commercial vehicles.
Can you define storage?
Overnight.
Okay, but if somebody was delivering
Right.
materials
Yeah.
in and out is,
FedEx and.
okay. May I?
Yes, sir.
I'm unclear on one point.
Mhm.
The applicant's asking for additional spaces, but it seems a little bit unclear. Is the city requiring additional spaces
No.
based on the current square footage?
No, we are not.
Okay, great. So regardless of the type of business that would occupy those
This-
locations?
The site, let me clarify, the site has adequate parking for all the buildings. What's happened as, it's a condo type ownership, so as each building got sold off, Armstrong sold a certain number of parking spaces to each building, starting with Wells Fargo, they have like, I think 33 spaces. So by the time you got back to these last two buildings, which are all the way in the back, there were only like 15 spaces left. And the applicant is saying that he doesn't have enough spaces, parking spaces.
So the way that the buildings were sold off and the parking was allocated,
That only left him with 15.
So are you saying that the other buildings actually have like approximately 33 spaces?
No, Wells Fargo was the first, I guess,
Okay.
and they have the most spaces.
Uh-huh.
And it varies, I have it from 7 to 33 based on the building. The original idea was that all the buildings on that corner would share parking. So the whole licensed parking thing is a private ownership issue. That's not something the city promoted or even knew about until a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, Walton's raising his hand. The parking currently is not reserved in any type of visual manner to require parking saying this is only for Wells Fargo, but they have the legal right to do that?
Yeah, I don't know if they have signs up or what.
So-
So, okay, so she's saying they have signs.
Counselor, can that parking be sold?
Honestly, I'm not going to. I mean, there are situations where a license to park could exist. Whether or not this particular situation is one of them, there's just too much I don't know about. You know what requirements or what other agreements, and they may violate other agreements despite it being independently valid. So I honestly don't know without.
So I'm going to go back to my original question. I apologize, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
fine.
Based on the type of occupancy that might go into those particular facilities, one type of occupancy could require additional parking than another type of occupancy.
Yeah, a retail or restaurant would require more than office. Right now, it's
Right.
all office.
It's all office. So for, hypothetically, restaurant goes in there. What's our requirement for a restaurant? And I'm talking hypothetically.
I think like say 4 per 1,000.
4 per
Well, it
1,000.
depends on if it has tables, if it's takeout.
Or drive-through.
Right.
There no drive-throughs allowed this year.
Okay.
So the current owner could have purchased a property that limits him as to the type of occupancy based on the existing spaces that are there. Correct? So, let me rephrase my question. I'm sorry. Nope, no, it's okay. The property could have, based on the parking that is currently allocated to those two buildings,
Mhm.
under the code as it is written today, only certain businesses would fit into those locations.
The 15 spaces that he has been licensed to use is below, like if he was building these two buildings standing alone, that's below the required number of spaces he would have.
So we would, based on those spaces today, we would not allow him to build those.
Not with 15 spaces, correct?
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
The applicant can I assume that this may be common area that's being used for this parking? And if so, is the petitioner the owner or the condominium association? Or is it the building owner? I'm trying to understand
Who owns the
who
parking?
owns the land in which we're dealing with, since it is a condominium. And if that's the way it's actually subdivided or platted or recorded, then typically the applicant's gonna be the association because it's somewhat on common area.
So the buffer area that he's asking to reduce is common area. The parking, I'm assuming, will still be common area. The owner is the Birmingham Commercial Owners Association. Mr. Jacklett is the applicant. And we have a letter from another one of the officers of the Birmingham Commercial Owners Association, the Secretary Treasurer, stating that he does have permission from the board to ask for this variance.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure of, that there's no problem with what's being requested.
Well, actually, you bring up a question, though. If the parking is owned by the association and not by the applicant, what do their bylaws say? And do we have a copy of their bylaws?
I haven't seen the bylaws or the licensing agreement.
I don't think that's, I think the only thing I'm concerned with is again, you're having to make sure that this is the owner allowing this to be put on their property.
I understand.
And as far as parking, however they want to work it out, that's the association's problem, right?
I disagree.
Okay.
But, I mean, Counselor, I mean,
Sorry, I missed what your question was, if there was a
Well,
question there.
Mr. Rico brought up a point saying, I thought it was a valid point, that the parking is considered to be common area, and it's owned by the association.
I'm not saying it's common area, I'm just saying that
But
it's.
that's what Angela just said, that's considered to be common area. And so that would mean that not owned by the applicant, that they have a license.
My understanding is that this is a variance that the applicant is acting on behalf of the Property Owners Association. Our ordinance says that the owner or its agent can make an application for a variance. It would be to the property, not to the building.
Correct.
Okay.
So the variance would be to the property, which is owned by the Property Owners Association. But I'm comfortable that at least the application process has been satisfied.
Okay. Awesome.
Further than that, I kind of leave it between the property owners and the Property Owners Association as to who can use the variance.
Yeah, they're gonna have to
Later on.
work out the whole
And that's what I was
licensing
saying,
thing.
that they have to work that out.
Right.
'Cause
I have a bigger question, but I'll wait till the end. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions to staff? At this time, we'd like to invite the applicant forward to please present. And if you would state your name and address, we'd certainly appreciate it.
My name is Leonard Jacklett. Property's 15800 Birmingham Highway, and we have building 100 and 200. And again, I would reedify, I'm actually acting as the agent. I'm the president of the association as well. And so it is kind of an unusual combination of things. Angela said it very clearly, so everything that we were going to share, this is Cynthia Chanley, and she did prepare a PowerPoint presentation maybe to help you see pictures of what our intention is. So would that be appropriate at this point?
Please.
Yes, sir.
She'll need to be at the microphone, though.
The proposed parking lot, as you can see, we've diagrammed for you. It's the western boundary side that the parking will be added in yellow. Entering from Hickory Flat, coming around to the backside of the buildings is where the additional parking will be addressed. And we can flip back and forth to this exhibit through this meeting. Next slide is basically just hard facts for you to see. The different square footage per buildings totaling 11,792. The parking assignment of 15. Of those, 2 are handicap. That equates to 1.27 per parking spaces per thousand, where we do know now that code in City of Milton is 2.8. After that, the additional parking spaces that he is requesting is 19, making a total of 34 spaces. We've also had contact with the engineer that did the original stormwater drainage, which Mr. Jacklick can explain to you in more detail about qualifying the stormwater and where the runoff will be. The next slide, page 4, shows you the new 10-foot landscape buffer will be entering from Hickory Flat, and you'll see a transformer right there, which has been addressed with Sonny to move that and relocate that. But you'll be coming around, almost coming in and curving around. So what you see, those trees will be remaining. That buffer will not be diminished at all. So you will be coming in, coming around back to the parking lot. So from Hickory Flat, you're really not going to see a parking lot at all behind the buildings. It's actually pretty clever. The next slide is your sidewalk will be coming up through between buildings 1 and 200. We do have a street light pole there, which will be matched as well in the back part. All the lighting will be matching the village. The mailbox, if it has to, will have to be relocated to a better area, so we won't have people tripping, but that will all be blended out with the 5-foot path from the rear, bringing people to the front. Your next slide represents 835 Hickory Flat Road. That's Mr. Stathem's property. It's on the west side boundary. It's a 4.58 acre tract with some commercial on it as well as agricultural. We will be backing up to his property, and you can see his old mature trees. He's got a few apples in there, wild cherries, etc. But that is the view right now when you're driving down Hickory Flat, and if you look to the right, this is the tree line that's in existence today and will remain. The next slide is the view if you were looking straight across on Hickory Flat to Mr. Stathem's property, showing you to the left all the trees and the buffer that is there currently. The next slide is the property directly across, which is 875 Hickory Flat Road. As we all know, is the Dockery Country Stores on the corner. Part of that is commercial. The rest of it is a vacant lot, and that is the view coming out of the village, and that's immediately what you do see coming from the exit. Coming back in, the next slide shows how that we won't be affecting any views coming out, hurting traffic, because we have a calming curve plus a stoplight to enter and exit on Hickory Flat Road. The next page shows you the parking looking straight, coming in from Hickory Flat, coming around the bend. This is the view of building 100 immediately on your right. The next building is building 200, and then that is our dumpster straight ahead. You will see the planting islands and the parking that's in the front of these buildings with 2 handicap. And the next page shows you the assigned parking agreement, which we do have enforced, which Wells Fargo really got to town on quickly. They were on the horse on that one, and they were given over 30 parking spaces for all their banking clients. They have signs throughout the village in that development assigned to their parking needs only for their banking customers. Looking at the next slide, this is your parking lot view. If you were standing at the dumpster and looking back towards Hickory Flat, on your left-hand side immediately is building 200, which is the 7,000 plus square foot building, then building 100 over 4,000, and then to your right are 2 historical homes that were removed and replanted by Armstrong, which we all know historically, if you've been here, which homes those were. And then the last, the next one is another view from Mr. Stathem's property. If you were standing square on with your left-hand side facing north, facing dead west, this is the actual view behind the buildings looking towards from his property onto the existing property line. And then our last picture is a Google Earth, which thank the Lord for these days, because this helps put everything in perspective for you to see in the area on a bird's eye view of what we're trying to do. But it's the area in the rear behind the big buildings is where the parking lot would be. And then as you can see, Mr. Statham has that shape that looks like a stocking on that property. And that is that. And then I'm going to let Mr. Jacklett answer any questions y'all might have regarding storm or whatever.
I've got one quick question. The gentleman that owns 835 Hickory Flat, his name is,
Tom Statham?
and have you gotten a letter from him stating that it's okay for you all to do this?
We have had many discussions. Tom is here tonight, and also Scott. They are here. I'm not sure if they're going to speak at all or have any thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be clear, they own the 4.5 acres?
Correct.
That would back up to this parking?
Correct.
Parking would back up to their property? Got it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Exactly.
2 questions, if I may. You stated that Mr. Statham's property is a mix of commercial and agricultural. What kind of commercial currently sits on that property?
He actually has, this section right here is.
We can't see that, I'm sorry.
It's the corner.
Okay, the bottom.
The
Oh, it's
bottom
right
of the
there.
booth is actually C1 classification that was in the original 40-foot area of all corners. When
Okay.
Milton did this back in the 50s, and this parcel is in a
C1.
commercial zone node, which
Okay.
has been left out, again, thrown out. But he is commercial here, backing up to Birmingham United Methodist Church, which they have ball fields here. Over here is where the Boy Scouts are, or the tent. Then this is a little counseling center, this parking lot with a little chapel.
Last question, if I may, sir. On slide number 13,
Okay.
so Angela goes back one, those trees that we're looking into your property right now, is that tree line on your property or is it on Mr. Statham's property?
It's a mixture of both. You have old trees that were his, and then it's actually planted from the original Armstrong development.
I think he was asking where all the mature trees are literally right on the property line. So that they will stay. They're right inside the 10-foot buffer.
They would say.
Yes.
Great, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just to be clear and confirm, you mentioned lighting. So lighting for these proposed 19 spaces would be in keeping with the rest of the village?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned about detention. How is this additional area going to meet the detention requirements for both?
I've talked to Lewis Young, who is the engineer, Columbia Engineering, who did the entire development, and he assured me to assure you, he said to let you know that there are several options that he has with the existing underground detention that he will use, and he might consider one additional small underground detention underneath what we're working on. He did not feel necessary at this point we'd have to do permeable pavement, but of course, he said, obviously, when he does the calculations, it's always an option.
Sure. So you understand the city has a code and you have to follow that
Yes,
code?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Any other questions?
Now, do any of these other parking spots have to be, I don't know, per the code, handicapped parking spots out of the 19?
I believe so. I can't answer specifically, but who was it that said that?
When we met with Robin McDonald, the city planner, and several other, and Angela and the architect and everybody, that was brought up and addressed, and those conditions will be, whatever they want, that's we're supposed to do will be applied to that back parking lot.
So you actually may not yield 19 spots.
Well, you would have 19 total, and of those, you might have 2 or 3 handicapped.
They take a little more space, so we might not get
You
the
might
full.
not
end up
get
with
the full
18.
19.
Yes, that's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
It just depends on what gets approved and, finalized by.
And I would like to make one more comment on this amount of parking spots. Talking to Mark, right now, if you notice, if you would just quickly look at our actual site plan, you'll notice that we did a island right in the middle of the buildings. You'll see as you come out the walkway, we did an island there. There was a comment made possibly to do a few more islands. Mark, the arborist who's here, felt like because of the direction of the sun that the actual buffer would probably suffice for the shade, which is substituting the island requirement. So, he can maybe share more about that, but he thought possibly to maintain as many spots as we could have to only have that one island.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Would the lighting then be located, sometimes the lighting is located in an island versus the buffer? So in this case, it looks like the lighting would be in the buffer.
Very good question. Really, we haven't tackled that yet. I mean, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. And actually, let me think here. I don't know if the photos are, I mean, they are in the islands in general. It's a good question. None of these photos show.
They're sporadic.
They're sporadic. They're just spread out according to the lumens that are needed for the parking area.
And
Yes, sir.
Sorry, then to tack on with that as well, so the potential sidewalk that's going to be going in between the buildings, is that going to be requiring additional lighting?
The side of the buildings actually have night lighting all the way down that are on all night. So actually, that goes right between lighting. That whole aisleway is already lit up at nighttime.
Yes, sir.
I want to get down to the heart and soul of this. What is your real hardship, and why do you need this parking?
Okay, good question. The buildings were built in 2006, and they've been vacant ever since. In 2013, I've watched those buildings for a long time, and I think it's a wonderful development. We purchased those, I guess, almost a year and a half ago. Little bit ignorant. I mean, I knew that I wasn't blind. We went in with 15 spots. I'm a member. I'm a fairly strong member of Wells Fargo. My thinking was, and this is a little ignorant, but my thinking was Wells had a lot of spots, and we'd be able to kind of do what I think should be common area. I come to find out through Wells and our fellow neighbors that the licensing agreement is a little bit more stronger than I really understood. And so in doing that, because we've had several conversations where we are in somebody else's spot, in that process, we realized we really are limited 15 spots. Jeff Pittman is here, and he is a commercial broker in Milton, and has you might want to ask him a few questions, but he has made it very clear that we're probably not going to be able to put anybody in those buildings with the current conditions. So it's been kind of an
office, is that correct?
Pardon?
This is office?
Office space, right.
Okay.
So we've got the one building is 7,500 square feet with probably 8 spots, and the other one 4,300 with 7 spots. So I believe building 100 is a building that I would like to use for our own office. Whether we could possibly use 7 or not, that would be very questionable. The building 200 is definitely a problem. It's a 2-story building with an elevator, 4 possible suites, and it has 8 spots. And that's why it's been vacant since 2006. So I went into it kind of optimistic, and then I've kind of in the last year and a half realized I have got a situation. So.
Do you think your broker can further emphasize any of these points?
Yeah, Jeff, he did fill out a card.
Good evening. Perhaps the most relevant comparison I can make is because Milton has a limited number of commercial opportunities for office. One of the most successful nearby is the Brayburn Office Village, which I also represent John Whelan in the sale and marketing of the buildings, and that's been a very successful project. One of the things that has made it very easy to succeed there is the parking ratio there is 4.59 spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area. Generally speaking, in the market, we like to lead with a ratio of about 4 spaces per 1,000. I've developed office space similar to this myself. I've always made it a priority to maximize parking because that is the single most important factor when you're attracting tenants. You can't, if you have to fight for a parking space in front of your building or walk too far away, it becomes inconvenient. It makes it very difficult to retain tenants and or sell to owners. So I would say, just by way of comment, that the 2.8 parking spaces as a code issue is very difficult to from my perspective, from a marketing perspective. We're not changing the code tonight, but just the point is that I think in this application, even though this is a good step forward if it's approved, and I would support its approval, it's still short of the 47 spaces that if I was developing these buildings from the ground up, that I would encourage as a consideration.
So you're saying 2.8 is what it will be if these parking spaces are granted? Is that
I think
correct?
that's the right ratio, and you know,
And especially if they possibly lose some to either handicapped or
which would make it even more difficult. So,
I understand.
and the types of office uses you're talking about, the general office, this is about as low as you can go.
And the offices that I see down the Wheeling project looks like primarily professionals' offices. It looks like you've got a dentist, a lawyer. I'm trying to remember what other office types.
There's a chiropractor, there's an orthodontist, there's a dentist. Dentists and orthodontists are not generally, although they're medical in nature, they don't have the same burden on a parking field as a pediatrics practice, an internist practice where you have lots of visits per hour. A more specialized medical practice, such as radiology or some other specialty, has a much lower demand on parking. So down there, they've succeeded well because those uses in and of themselves don't create a burden. And then by way of comparison, they also still have 4.6 spaces effectively to park. So there's never any problem at Brayburn with parking. And the other uses that you have in there, as you say, there's general office uses. There's a State Farm agent. There's a company that just relocated from south of Crabapple over to that building. They're in the technology business. So there's a nice mix of tenants down there.
So in your professional opinion, that is the hardship?
Absolutely. It's going to be very difficult to market these without some improvement.
And could you state your name and address to the board, please?
Sure. It's Jeff Pittman, and my office is at 3380 Trickham Road in Woodstock, Georgia.
Thank you very much.
I do have one more question as well. I know you kind of touched on that a little bit about the agreement, I guess, that may be in place. Like, is there actually something written down that actually says how many parking spaces those tenants have?
I have a copy.
The answer is yes. It's actually all part of the license or the deed, or I'm not sure. Cynthia has the proper terminology, but yes, upon purchasing it, we actually have a specific list of what spots are ours.
So by purchasing it, what it says in that document is that you actually only have these 15 spaces.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And the way that started, I think Angela touched on it. It really should have been community-type parking. But when Wells Fargo came in 2006, I believe it was, they have a protocol that they require 35, 30, whatever it is, period. That kind of set the ball rolling. So I think Armstrong, of course, and I think rightfully so, thought Wells would be a good person to buy the property, and then obliged them in that, and that started the snowball effect through the entire process.
So do we know again how many square feet Wells Fargo has?
Yeah, it's about 4,300, I believe.
4,300.
Yeah, so they have excessive amount of parking. Yeah, but again, it was something that started and then it kind of grew from there. What's that? She said kicking the can.
What's that?
Kicking the can.
It was kicking the can. The first one in got the most, kicked the can. That one got, and then by the end, yeah.
So do you have a business active in this complex already?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a business that's active?
No,
Okay.
both buildings are still vacant.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Are we going to see you again for signage? I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just asking the question.
No, the only thing I know on that, we have the development actually has a dedicated signage out front that has little placards that could be used. Yeah.
Okay.
Now you might see me because I was going to ask you if there's any adjustments down the road, but at this point we have a given signage out there.
Okay. Any other questions?
And what about the signage above the door?
Haven't really thought about that, to be honest with you. I mean, again, we're just trying to see where we take them.
Okay,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
thank you.
At this time, we'd like to open the floor to public comment. If you come forward, please state your name and address for the board.
Scott Reese, doing business at 13685 Highway 9, Milton, Georgia. I'm here tonight representing Mr. Statham. He owns the property due west of the property that we're discussing as far as the parking lot. We understand the hardship as stated as far as the lack of parking area for the buildings. It's not the perfect situation to go from a 50-foot buffer to a 10-foot row of planted trees. With that understood, he's not really in objection to it. There's a couple of things, if it could possibly be conditioned. We understand, even though in prior meetings the discussion was to direct the parking towards the buildings. That's an engineering impossibility if you look at it. So we are going to have traffic, or we're going to have headlights shining into his property. He would like a 4-board fence placed along the property line, and then he trusts Mark to put the understory plantings in to impede as much of that traffic or the headlight spillage onto the adjoining property. Also, if it's possible for the I know the lighting will have to meet the city night code ordinance and all, but if it's possible, my understanding this is probably going to be offices that close down 8 o'clock or something at night. If possible, to have the outdoor lighting on timers to maybe at 10 o'clock or something like that be shut off in case, you know. Mr. Statham at one point will probably be developing this, or it will be residentially developed on the AG property. Also, if in the future Mr. Statham so desires to develop his commercially zoned property, if we come before this board, we would expect the same consideration on any variance requests as granted tonight. Thank you for your time.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Back to I want to understand the intent on the timer lights.
Oh, the intent?
Yes.
If you have a house next door on the property, and if the lights at midnight are on and no one's using the parking lot, we're just getting night lighting with no purpose. So my thought was, if it's possible to have those lights go off from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning, that was my thought process. A little bit off the cuff, but that was just a quick discussion point with Mr. Statham.
Okay.
The lights catty corner over in the SunTrust Publix area, do those turn off?
I can't say what happens at 1 or 2 in the morning. At 11 at night, they're on.
Okay.
Now, these buildings are between his property and those lights. We're now going to get lights
Fair point.
between, now a 10-foot strip, and it's probably going to be a few years before any plantings reach the height of those lights.
Yeah.
So that is the thought process. There's no reason, if we're in a vacant parking space or a parking lot overnight, to have lights shining down through there, in my opinion.
Right. Okay.
Yes, sir.
2 questions. I kind of look at lighting a different way. I look at lighting as stopping crime as much as anything. If you turn off lights, then that makes it a dark spot, and I'm not going to say a burglar can't just park there and go rob that house right next door. But at the same time, you know, there are different type of lighting fixtures now that are LED fixtures that have an ability to have motion sensors and turn on instantaneously if certain motion is in that area. They don't have to have a warm-up period like the halogens and mercury vapor and other type of lights. Some communities are even looking at that for street lighting and not necessarily going to where all the lights stay on at all hours, just when there's motion. If something like that occurs, would you?
I would think, what we're looking for is the least amount of obtrusion onto this property. I think there will probably be down lights on the buildings as far as, we're not looking to try to create a Wyoming night sky out there, but neither are we looking for a Kmart parking lot either. So, I understand, I've gone through the process of the night sky ordinance with Milton. There will be downward lights, but the least obtrusive that the night lights could be, the better it would be for an adjoining residential property.
Sure.
What we're looking at is we're transitioning now from a commercial zoning to an AG zoning.
I understand.
The city in its infinite wisdom, somehow we lost the transition. Now, we would like to regain that transition sometime, but right now, we're commercial adjoining agricultural.
Now, would Mr. Statham have any problem of selling them additional land for more parking?
Well, as you, with your background, know, cutting out chunks and corners out of rectangular pieces is typically not a solution to a problem. That just does not work. Many times on subdivisions, when we're going forward, and the neighbor just wants to buy a sliver, that just does not work. Now, the entire parcel is for sale, but to cut slivers out is not an economically viable process. I hope you understand that.
Okay. Just had to ask the question.
I had to answer.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Julie Zonner Bailey, and I live at 255 Hickory Flat Road in Milton, Georgia. Let me first say that the community welcomes Mr. Jacklett to the neighborhood, and we look forward to his business being located at the Birmingham Crossroads. I think before I go into any of my specific comments regarding the specific parking requests and buffer reduction, there's been several statements made into the record just a moment ago that are inaccurate, and I think that they need to be leveled here, especially because you're a quasi-judicial board. As an example, the 4-quadrant solution at the Birmingham Crossroads, and I specifically referenced the 2004 document that was approved by Fulton County and subsequently adopted by the City of Milton, as the city attorney can attest to. The 4-quadrant solution incorporates 27.1 acres across all 4 quadrants. The quadrant in question, which is the southwestern quadrant, only includes that which is currently zoned for mixed use. There was reference made by the last speaker that the adjacent land was a combination of AG1 and commercial. That is not accurate. It is AG1 land. The legal documentation within the City of Milton states that. And because as a quasi-judicial board you're considering all of the information that was presented to you, I think it's critical legally that be stated either by the city attorney or the staff. It will be obviously, it's your prerogative, but there was definitely some misstatements just made about the zoning of the adjacent land, and that's critical. This is a judicial board, and that data needs to be confirmed, and I would ask that staff and or the city attorney at the end of my comments, make sure that you have accurate information. That's very concerning that we would have inaccurate data presented for your consideration. The other statement, there was a question made about the types of uses that are considered on this quadrant. It is a mixed use, primarily office. So it's not contemplated under the zoning laws that were adopted, and we can't just make those up. That mixed quadrant is very express that those are to be offices. It's not to be some other high-intensity use that would change the 2.8 parking requirements by law of the City of Milton. We can have different opinions. We can talk about different statutes, but in the City of Milton, 2.8 parking spots per 1,000 is what is legally adopted and required. If you look at the mixed use for this particular quadrant, the total amount of spaces at 76. For the number of square footages that are on the ground, 67 is what's required. So there's actually 9 more spaces available based on the math of the City of Milton. Those are the facts. And so I think it's important that you guys have the facts before you as opposed to misinformation. There is some discussion as to whether or not the shared parking that was a requirement of zoning was adhered to by A.G. Armstrong. A legal question is whether or not licensed parking, if that was even legally allowable to be allocated to Wells Fargo. As recently as this evening, Curtis Mills, who's one of the association members and owns land there on that same quadrant, noted that it was his understanding that Wells Fargo at one point had released some of their quote-unquote licensed parking for shared parking. That's another piece of information that the community nor the underlying landowners, and including you, have information to. There's a lot of unknowns based on what has been stated even as recently as this evening. So a underlying question that the community has is, do we have evidence of the licensing agreement? Do we have evidence that that licensing agreement was adequately and legally conveyed from A.G. Armstrong to Wells Fargo? Because the zoning legally required shared parking. And if the legal requirement of shared parking were upheld, there would be adequate parking for everybody, including Mr. Jacklett in his recent acquisition of these two buildings. So to add more parking when there's adequate parking under the shared parking requirement is a question that has not yet been addressed. And from a legal perspective, and to ensure that the city doesn't have legal challenges going forward, a strong suggestion would be that some of these things get resolved before any decision is decided. Very, very concerning, and that information has only come to light as recently as this evening. So the combination of misstatements about what is C1 and what is not is critical. The issue about what is the appropriate and legally binding parking requirements of the city, I mean, those are factually in place. Again, different people can have different opinions, but the city requires 2.8 per thousand. The others that we need to firmly confirm that it is mixed use with office intention. There aren't other high-intensity uses. With all of that said, regarding this request before you, it does not meet the consideration as set forth by the BZA bylaws. Expressly on page 4, it does not meet the warrant of a hardship. This land was acquired with those known licensing agreements in place, with the number of known parking spots understood. A hardship is not defined as a self-imposed hardship. Again, from a legal perspective, that's a critical distinction. As noted in the material presented by staff, these two buildings were purchased with the parking in place. The fact that a buyer of office space now feels they don't have enough parking in order to sell or lease these for a higher value, again, it does not constitute a hardship. And I believe that you guys are bound by the hardship requirements as set forth by your bylaws. I've already noted that the shared parking allows for 67 spaces, and on the ground there are already 76, which would indicate that there is indeed adequate parking for all of the applicants or all of the landowners within that quadrant. Furthermore, there's been some discussion this evening as to whether or not the applicant has a signed agreement to represent the association. There are members of that association that indicated as recently as this evening that they did not sign any such agreement. I referenced Mr. Curtis Mills, who's in the audience, as well as Mr. Joe Whitley. They are part of that association. They own buildings on that quadrant. And I don't know whether or not the applicant has their signatures, but I was told this evening that they had not approved of this representation of the association, which is, I guess, one of the questions that was initially posed by Mr. Recook. So short of having a legal documentation that says that the applicant represents that association, I would ask that be something that be proven before any decision is made. Again, it's a legal consideration. It's pretty critical. In terms of those that have been noted as expressly supporting this, there is counter information that would say that they were not even aware that this meeting was here. At 6:20 this evening, Mr. Curtis Mills, who's in the audience, called, not realizing that tonight's meeting was in place. Mr. Joe Whitley was just landing in Atlanta from out of town. He owns one of the buildings. And again, he has not signed anything that says that he supports the application that is before you. As you may know, Joe was the North Georgia District Attorney for Georgia, and he does own land on this quadrant and has concerns as to what has been presented that he has not yet agreed to. Again, that would indicate that perhaps more information is needed before any decision is made this evening. At a minimum, those who were directly impacted would surely need to be considered legally. Thus far, it would at a minimum indicate that a deferral is needed for this evening, if not a denial outright. I would strongly encourage a minimum of a deferral so that all parties interested could get to the table and actually come forward with accurate and confirmed information. As I think it's important to note, and I think it was alluded to, that the property that's in question is common land, and therefore it's owned by the entirety of the businesses. And so without a strict legally drawn-up document with their signature, common land cannot just be decided upon without the express consideration of those who own that common land. And I know that the packet provided to the community surely didn't include such evidence of legal consideration. I'd like to also mention that the encroachment into the 50-foot buffer, it is in direct conflict with the legally approved 2004 rezoning, specifically for the Birmingham Crossroads and also the specific rezoning for that particular quadrant. That did require a buffer so that you did transition from the mixed-use office back to AG1. And so to delete that does have a negative impact, not just on adjacent landowners, but the community as a whole. And I think another piece of missing information, when we look at the photographs, there are photographs of land next to and across the street, but Doug and Charna McCurry, who live immediately across the street and next to 835 Hickory Flat Road, they're a residence. They live on numbers. It's been in Doug's family forever. Charna's father, unfortunately, is ill, and she is with her family. But they will be negatively impacted by this encroachment into that 50-foot buffer. They're not immediately next to it. They're immediately across the street, and they've lived there for probably 40 years. Consideration of the transition is critical to the community. With regards to the licensed agreement, there hasn't been any evidence that Wells Fargo is unwilling to release additional shared parking. The reality is that there is ample parking that is not utilized. I live right there, and never is that parking completely full. According to staff, approximately 4,000 to 5,000 square feet of building is the Wells Fargo building. At that 2.8, I think that the math is that they would need 12 spaces. If, and we don't know because it hasn't been confirmed legally, if they've been given a license agreement with 35, they obviously have 2.5 times more than what they're going to utilize or need. So the greatest solution would be to go back to shared parking. And that really hasn't been explored. And so in the best interest of Mr. Jacklett and the other landowners who own buildings right there, the best solution for the community and for that mixed-use development would be to explore with Wells Fargo directly their willingness to release some of that shared parking. A conversation of that nature between the appropriate parties could warrant a win for everybody. And so, again, that exploration at a detailed level would warrant, at a minimum, a deferral before any further decisions would be made. In addition to the encroachment into a 50-foot buffer, which was part of the original zoning, it also is inconsistent with the recently approved rural Milton overlay. As many of you are aware, there's a Northwest Fulton overlay that's been in place for years. That's been renamed the rural Milton overlay. It requires a rural viewshed. By extending parking into otherwise AG1 transition land, it does impact that rural viewshed, which is a recent addition of staff and recently approved by the City of Milton. This parking would be viewed by Hickory Flat and by adjacent landowners. Whether they live currently there or not is really not the point, is that it's supposed to be transitioned for the long term. So in summary, the community would ask that you either defer or deny. This request does not meet the 4 standards of hardship. It does negate the 50-foot requirements as put forth by the zoning and the Birmingham Master Plan. The Design Review Board also noted the infringement of that transition area. We don't have any evidence that the association, as represented by Mr. Jacklett, has actually agreed legally to what has been put forth. And in fact, we have evidence to the contrary. And again, in the interest of all individuals, that common land should be considered for all of those entities. Additionally, we would ask again that for the record, staff confirm what of the land is actually AG1 next to, because there were some statements made into the record that if this was approved this evening, other adjacent landowners would want to seek equal consideration. And equal consideration, when you've been given false information indicating that that adjacent land is commercial, would set in motion some very unintended consequences. And so those are not light statements, and those need to be corrected for the record this evening. Very concerning. At a minimum, there are so many legal questions surrounding this, and based on information that only came forth this evening that has been put in, and I hadn't seen any timing, but it doesn't seem like anybody else. Right here. Yeah, I just didn't see anybody else timed. We would ask for a deferral at a minimum. There's a lot of legal questions that are unanswered, and for any applicant to represent that they represent other members of an association without their signature or express consideration wouldn't be appropriate. So at a minimum, we would ask for a deferral, ideally a denial of this, but we surely could not support an approval based on all the questions that were posed this evening. The community, at a minimum, would deserve a deferral. We appreciate your consideration. If at any point an approval be considered, we would ask that all of staff's considerations be included, those of the Design Review Board, floorboard fencing, lighting to be turned off, et cetera. But there's so many things before those would even be considered. We genuinely ask for a deferral and your consideration this evening. Thank you very much.
I've got some questions for you, ma'am.
Yes.
How many people have you been texting during the meeting?
I texted Chris Lagerbloom expressly because Chris and I had a
Have you copied anybody else on these texts during the meeting?
Nope. Chris Lagerbloom, and he's got evidence of that. And I sent Chris Lagerbloom an express email that said I was concerned that there had been a statement into the record that there was C1 land immediately adjacent. He knows that not to be true. Staff knows that not to be true. I've got documentation that that's not true. You're welcome to look at my phone and look at the text that I sent. Chris Lagerbloom is the city manager of the city of Milton. He ultimately has responsibility. And I'm very, very, very aware of the 27.1 acres. And for anybody to stand before you tonight and tell you that part of that adjacent land is C1, it is an untruth. And at a quasi-judicial board, for us to talk about data that's not accurate is...
That property's not in front of us tonight.
No, but part of that consideration...
We have nothing to do with that property. We're not discussing that property.
But there was a request for equal consideration. I just want
that's not
staff
under
to
our
make clear to you
consideration.
guys that it's AG1, it's not C1. Because that becomes a matter of legal record for future
It's
discussions.
not under our
Thank you.
consideration. Thank you.
You answered my question. Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
How does this
No, just hang on.
You get the chance to speak at the end.
You got a chance. Counselor, can anybody come back that's spoken before or not?
Just the applicant.
Or just the applicant?
I believe, well, let's get the official.
Mr. Reese would like to make another comment, and
If you have, hang on.
Still in public comment.
If my guess is that the 10 minutes has expired,
Okay.
you, as a board,
Okay.
you may extend the time.
Okay. At this time, we'd like to invite the applicant back up, and you,
Actually, there are others that were referenced in this audience. Curtis Mills, I believe.
He didn't raise his hand.
he didn't raise his hand to speak.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure we
let
weren't
me-
shutting that opportunity
Okay,
off.
one more time, is there any additional public comment?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to invite the applicant back up, and you can present a rebuttal or a closing statement.
Okay, appreciate that.
And you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Julie, that was quite the mouthful. I appreciate everything she did say. I'm not quite sure I understand the commercial issue, so I'm not going to go there because we've sat in great detail with Robin and everybody else on that issue. But the comment that she made about Wells Fargo, she did call me and question that, and early on in the season, I tried to see if there would be a possibility of doing that. And they said, the person, and I didn't, to her benefit, I didn't climb a corporate ladder. Okay, we have not done that. But they said that is our protocol. We cannot release it. The releasing parking lots that I believe she's referring to did happen according to Armstrong. They gave them back 2 or 3 spots way back when. Everything that they have right now is a licensed agreement, and they will not allow us to park there. That's why the signs are even all up. The unfortunate issue with the licensing agreement, I commented to Robin, and I think it was Robin, somebody else. What is the legal recourse? Because I agree with her, that would be great, and I would be an advocate of that. I have no problem with that issue whatsoever to erase it right now. And the comment was from Robin, what are you going to do? I mean, the city can't do anything about it. We certainly can't do anything about it. We certainly couldn't fight Wells Fargo. Armstrong had to agree to begin with because Wells Fargo wouldn't have show up unless their protocol was met. So I appreciate what Julie said, but at the same time, I'm a practical man, and I know there's really no place we can go in a legal battle on these licensing agreements that have been established since 2006, especially with Wells Fargo's protocol. So that item I think we're stuck with. One of the most discerning and concerning statements that she said, and she kept saying very concerning, I would have a very concerning comment of her questioning what our hardship is. You know, those buildings have sat vacant for a reason since 2006. I would love to think I was the smartest guy in the world. However, I'm a very trustworthy guy. And just like she said on the Wells Fargo, especially since I am very involved with Wells Fargo with my assets, I was very ignorant going into that. The fact that I, after a year and a half, have realized we're still vacant and learning more. Jeff actually is the one that I can tell you before all of you that Jeff's the one who has really educated me on the need for the spaces to market. And so again, my ignorance does not by any mean eliminate the extreme hardship I'm looking at right now. And so I implore you that I've got a situation on that. Is my 5 minutes up?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. And then she commented on the board. Unfortunately, I'm not quite clear on that. I know Curtis is sitting here. Brad is sitting here also. He's the secretary of the association. I am the president. And I have talked to Curtis originally and talked to Joe. The two out-of-town people we have not talked to. That is true. But the letter that Angela has as we've come into this was to see if we have a viable situation here. The letter that she has, and I do not mind whatsoever you approving this with contingency. We took the perspective that the out-of-town people, if we get approval on this, then we will sit down and discuss how to do this, how to go about it, and what we need to do. I have no problem whatsoever. We've assured Curtis of that. I've assured Curtis of that if we get approval, we'll know that we have options and what can we do as a board. And that's the perspective we took, and that is in fact written in our letter that upon receiving this, we will be discussing details with the board. There was one other item. Oh, yes, very important. My last minute. The neighbor she's reflecting on, absolutely, I totally disagree with that. If you stand at their neighbor, looking our way with everything that is there existing and being left, you will not have any impact whatsoever. Very strongly disagree with that statement. I've stood at that neighbor's, look back, there is absolutely zero impact. I believe that's my comments. So I do summarize by saying I appreciate your consideration. I do know we have a situation in the community. I do know my heart is to work it out in every detail possible to make it a beautiful place, to make it functional, and to finally fill those buildings the way I believe should be. They've been vacant long enough, and that's my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask him?
Sure.
Sir,
Sir?
may I ask you two questions?
Yes.
To clarify, your application is as the property owner, correct? Or are you?
The application is actually for the association.
It's for the association?
Correct.
Okay. Secondly, in your warranty deed, when you purchased these properties, were the parking spaces part of that warranty deed?
Cynthia, I don't know the answer. Yes.
Okay.
I don't know how that all was written up, but yes.
Okay. Yes is good enough.
Okay.
And
Yes,
I've
sir.
got a couple questions.
Yes.
So one is back to this whole agreement that may be in place. I know we were handed this, but is there anything else with this? Is there an agreement that's attached to this besides the actual exhibit of just the parking spaces that are allocated to each tenant?
I'm sorry, agreement?
Yeah.
I didn't bring that file tonight, but every building has a recorded deed with the license, and it's recorded in Fulton County, how many parking spaces everybody has. It was amended. Armstrong would go back. You had lots of different changes made in the parking, but all of that has been recorded. It is in a deed, and it's been assigned.
Do you have your warranty deed which reflects your 15 spots?
Not with me. I didn't bring it tonight. It wasn't request. I normally pack every file with me, and I did not bring that one, and I apologize.
And the other question I have is in regards to, you representing this association. So are you basically conveying to us that you've personally spoken to everybody else and they all agree to what you're applying for?
Yeah, no, I have not spoken to the 2 out-of-town members.
Okay.
But everybody in town did know what we were doing.
And they agreed with that?
My understanding they did, but as of tonight, there was an issue. I think what instituted this tonight is there was a question on whether those spots would be for our building or whether they would be common spots. And I assured Curtis at that point, listen, those are the details at association. We're not moving forward until we figure all that out. All I know is we need the spots, to facilitate being able to move these buildings. So the answer is yes. I mean, we moving forward, everything has got to be ran through the board, and I have no problem whatsoever with all that being understood in advance, contingent upon full agreement on how we proceed forward.
Who's paying for the improvements?
I am because they're my buildings.
As
So
the property owner.
yes, and donating everything to the association.
Essentially as the tenant,
Right.
as the
Pardon?
building owner, not the property owner.
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
I'd like to understand that.
The association would not have any money, so I'm having, because they will directly impact my building, I will have to spend the money and do that. We can't as association.
Okay.
And the other issue that I'm up against right here, and this is where my hardship is, all of the buildings have the appropriate amount of parking. And of course, Wells has excess of, and by the way, the 2.8 that Julie's talking about, I believe, is it not true the commercial, the Wells and the other commercial building is more than 2.8? I believe that's more, the office building is my understanding is 2.8. So we really actually do not have an excess because we have 2 commercial buildings in there as well. But at any rate, my hardship is that as a practical matter, everybody does have the appropriate amount of spaces, and I do not. So I have to face reality that nobody's going to spend money. I would have to pay the money to do this.
So economically, as the owner of that building, you are doing the improvements, but those improvements will ultimately be owned by the association.
Correct. That's what we're trying to get a hold of. As a practical matter, I would think that those would be applied to our buildings, because again, we're the only ones shy of the buildings, of the parking amount, quantity. But at the same time, I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm trying to understand the economic aspects of it, but I'm also trying to understand the real estate legal part of it.
Okay.
My question earlier as to whether the 15 spots that you currently have, if they're part of your warranty deed, and I'll take it at face value that they are.
Yes.
But to Ms. Bailey's comment earlier that originally was common space,
Correct.
these additional spaces that you're building, who owns them?
All of the common area in the development is basically the buildings go straight down. They just own the dirt under the building. All the other sidewalks, grass, everything is owned by the associations, and it's in their association package. Any improvements in any of the common areas are owned by the association. So he's improving the value of the association's land by putting in the parking lot at his cost, covering everything as an improvement.
I think I can answer that question more
But
clearly.
let me maybe clarify the question, and then I don't mean to interrupt you, sir.
Yeah.
But based on what you're saying, ma'am, these additional spots that you would then create would go to the association to their benefit, but ultimately would be common spaces available to other tenants.
That's what we need to work out with the association.
Okay.
The answer is we're willing to do that. However, understand, this is a key point. The association owns all of the parking spaces in the entire building, but they're licensed, each spot is licensed to a specific building. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
See, these spots would be no different than any other spots.
But, and I think, again, Mike, and you answer this, but potentially what you're saying is if you're going to apply for this variance, but then you're going to go back to this association now and say, okay, we've been approved to get this. However, are you guys with me to do this?
Correct.
Wouldn't it make more sense to go ahead and get that done first and then come back and say, okay, the association has all agreed to this. We're there. Everybody's okay with us getting 18 spaces, 19 spaces, whatever it may be. And now let's apply for the variance to get that.
Well, yes and no. I know for a fact everybody will be in agreement with the process. The only issue we have to resolve is, will those be applied to the two buildings with my economic output?
Right.
And apply those, or would they be common area?
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
that goes back to, again, the quote-unquote agreement that's already in, whatever this agreement is in place that, references this exhibit about the allocated parking spaces. What does that agreement say? Does that agreement say you can make any changes to that? Does that agreement, who's actually going to have to sign off on that? Is it just going to be you and the association? Who are going to be the parties that would potentially have to sign off on something?
Our
like that?
association is a majority vote, so it'll be, if there's 7 buildings, so it'll be 4 out of 7. I happen to know we will have 4 out of 7 no matter what happens. I know that for sure. But I believe we'll have 7 out of 7 as far, I have no doubt we'll have 7 out of 7 as far as the activity of putting the parking spots in. But again, I think the only question would be, and that's what we have to vote on, and that's what I'm saying. Brad and I have already discussed this, is that we will not be moving forward until we have all the agreement on how we're going to do this. But again, tonight's purpose, the purpose of was to see if we have even the option to go down this road that we can possibly put parking in. That is what this was about. Now, internally, we have got to go ahead and figure out whether there will be common spots or whether there be licensed spots. We do have to work that out. But right now, we were applying to see the open door to have this possibility. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
I do have one follow-up
Yes.
question for them. So there was some additional considerations that were asked from the public comment. One was staff added this one, no overnight commercial parking, 4-board fence to the adjacent property owner, and a consideration for lighting, which would accomplish intrusion as well as security, so some sort of potentially censored or timered lights. Do you have any issues with those added conditions?
Absolutely not. Matter of
I think
fact,
there
we
was one additional one. There was also
Plantings.
I'm sorry.
Plantings.
The low plantings. too.
yes,
Understory planting.
yeah, we are very open to anything, especially with Mark. Anybody has we will abide by whatever you say. There's no question about that.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions to staff or the attorney from the board?
We called you out on that one.
Yeah.
I added that.
I've got a question. Just touching more about this whole potential agreement that may be in place in terms of parking that they may have in there. I mean, can you shed any more light on that? I mean, is that something that should be considered?
Well, your consideration are those that are set forth, and I think it mostly is going to address the hardship as far as I can, and that's just my opinion. Whether or not it exists doesn't change which considerations you apply. It just depends whether you believe it touches on the considerations that you are to apply to this variance application.
Okay. And
So
second,
if you believe the parking agreement, such whether or not it exists, then you apply that to your analysis.
for the hardship, right? And secondly, in terms of the authority, again, that this is, that he may have on behalf of the association. Thoughts on that and how that would be.
Well,
how
I
that
have-
may affect, what we may or may not approve.
My understanding is we have a letter from the secretary and the president of the association advising that they have authority to request the variance. I understand they've said that they don't know what they're going to do with the parking, but who gets assigned it, but I don't know that, and this is up to you, that isn't necessarily one of the considerations. You're just considering whether there's parking or whether the buffer is extended or not.
Is the city
I have-
satisfied with that letter giving him legal standing to make
if-
application?
I am less comfortable than I was before, though I haven't heard, while I have heard that maybe not everyone agreed, I haven't heard anyone say they have objected. I understand one of the people who may not have known about it ahead of time is present. I haven't heard that they've stood up to object to it either.
Well, and on that note, if I can, Angela, can you confirm that the variance notice was posted? Did you receive the proper picture verification?
Letters went out, there was an ad in the paper, and signs have been posted.
So in this case, would the letters have gone out to each of the buildings within this complex as well, including Mills, Whitley, and the Secretary Brad?
We went within 300 feet.
Okay, including each tenant within that association, okay.
Can we actually review this letter?
It just notifies them of the public.
No, the letter from the association.
Oh, sorry.
Sure, should be fine.
One of the comments I would make, again, I don't want to get this into a legal decision under whether someone has the right or not. We have taken the application in. We are having this case brought to us. Ultimately, if they decide that they can't get the votes, that's between them and their, be it stockholders, be it their corporation.
Agreed. No
Okay,
argument
so
about that.
I don't want to make this into a situation where,
absolutely.
we're determining where they have rights. The real question is, we're needing to decide, can they, do we believe that this is something that they could build and not be a hardship, or is a hardship?
Sure.
Right, and
Right.
I mean,
No,
and I'd also like to make a comment on that as well. I mean, the thought process being, if this is going to be a potential hardship for them, and the reason why I'm asking some of those questions about the agreement and stuff, because potentially, as a point that's been made, and, I understand that we could grant a variance to them, sure, and then they can make that decision. However, does that even need to be done? Is this what the quote-unquote agreement that they may have in place about parking and how it's allocated, is that something that is there, that they have to follow by? Or is this just something that's been told, this is not some hard agreement in place, and the parking that they already have in there is enough to cover?
Well, but to your point, I understand where you're going. We would have to, that's why I asked the question about the warranty deed. We'd have to get warranty deeds for each one of those particular property owners. There may not have to be a license agreement. Armstrong, it was their property. They could sell that as they see fit.
Sure, and you're right, and that may be true, and they may have been deeded over this condo and these specific
Right,
parking
exactly.
spaces, storage, whatever the case may be, but we don't know that, right?
Well, can I?
Well,
can I raise-
but we'd have to we'd have to get warranty deeds for every single one that's in there. Yeah.
Well, but we should be looking at whether or not there's a hardship here.
Right.
That's the
And
starting point.
Sure.
irrespective of warranty deeds, there's two buildings that are pigeonholed in the back here, and they have 15 spots which abut them. Even if there was a plausible argument that says parking is, first come, first serve, or, they should get 6 additional spots based on, or 15 additional spots, but they're up here in the front corner. Well, I'd argue that's a hardship for these two buildings, that they have to walk all the way through the complex. So based on the way that this plat has been laid out, it poses a side-shaped topography and some exceptional considerations that the literal or strict application of the ordinance, these guys have a hardship. So that's irrespective of if you say that these agreements are binding, legally binding or not. Just based on the size, shape, and the layout, they don't have access to very much parking.
For instance, let's see the Wells Fargo.
Well,
Where's
Fargo's
Fargo's
here, they're surrounded by parking. It's a sea of parking. So even if Wells were to give some up, it's still not very convenient for these buildings. And including the fact that this building 200 is 4 suites, so you could potentially have 4 tenants in there, and they have 8 spots, 2 of which are handicapped. So they have 6 spots for 4 tenants.
Sure, potentially, but for instance, even if they were to these spaces here in front of building, what is this?
300.
300,
There's
400.
4 spots there.
Were allocated to 1 and 200, and these spots in front of Wells Fargo were for 300 or 400. Right?
Yes, except that when you run a business and you have people who come to visit your business, you can't say, well, make sure you park over here, make sure you park over there. It's, you know,
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't.
Or then it becomes a hardship for that business because people say, you know what, I'm not going to do my business there because
It's too hard to
it's
get
too hard to get parking.
Right.
No,
And therefore, we find that they have a hardship.
Mhm.
So I think this discussion around warranty deeds and whether there's legal agreements in place for the parking spots is really immaterial to the application and the determination of whether there's hardship here.
I'm ready to vote.
Any other questions to staff before we close the public hearing? At this time, I'd like to close the public hearing. The floor is open for a motion.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion
Yes, sir.
for approval of V 14-012. This is to reduce the 50-foot buffer to 10-foot in order to add additional parking. In addition, I would like to make these recommended conditions: that the new parking area shall be made of pervious, material. Number 2, that the parking lot islands and buffer planting around this new parking area is to meet the ordinance requirements, and a landscape plan is to be approved by the city arborist. 3, the buffer area around this parking area shall be revegetated in order to provide screening for the adjacent property as well as Hickory Flat Road. Buffer planting will be approved by the city arborist. Number 4, a 5-foot high, 4-board black fence with welded wire will be placed along the east property line. West property line, excuse me.
Yeah.
West property line,
Black fence, white.
5-foot high, 4-board black fence
With, you said something.
with welded wire.
Okay.
Lighting of the new parking lot shall be directed away from the western property. Number 7, lighting from the fixtures on the new parking lot shall not leave this site. And the last one is no overnight parking is allowed in the new parking lot area.
No overnight commercial parking or no overnight parking?
I just said no overnight parking.
Your
'cause
second, your second
if
to
a-
last point, I'm sorry? Something
that
shall not
the
be-
lighting from the fixtures on the new parking lot shall not leave this site. In other words, what that does is it,
I get on with you. Okay.
what I'm trying to say is, if this is the western property, if all the lights are here and they're aiming that way, none of the light is coming back towards them, and then also the cone of the light.
And you sure you don't want to say commercial
The
there?
problem you have is when you say commercial or residential or whatever, as I'm being an officer, how am I enforcing whether it's commercial or not?
Because there's a different type of a license plate.
Well, yeah, but I could have a business vehicle there.
We have
I
a
don't
motion,
know.
we have a motion, do we have a second?
Were you specific on the type of lighting? Were you making any?
I did not. I debated about making LED, and that way you could put it on a timer. And the problem I've got with all of that,
Well, hang on,
lighting
hang on.
is.
Hang on.
Let's get to discussion. Let's just,
We need a
I'm sorry, we
second.
need a second.
A second.
We got a second. Discussion.
all right. Go ahead. Some of the point by point.
Sure.
I agree that overall, okay, let's find a way to approve this. The material of the parking lot, I'd like it to be similar to what the rest of the parking lot is, to have this be separate.
Pervious pavers or pervious pavement can look exactly like it. It will be a little bit more
And
open
that's,
court.
and that's the staff's recommendation anyway.
And,
Yeah,
and, but again, it's not gravel, and it could be asphalt. But if you wanted to say that, then we could say asphalt porous pavement. I did not spell it out as
No,
asphalt.
and honestly, my preference is just leave that line completely out.
Since there's
It's a-
underwater
it-
detention, or underground detention,
It's a business decision, particularly because
Sure.
of the
why?
That's fine
why
with
add
me.
additional
Why add?
burden?
I'd be glad to
We
remove
need
it.
to make an amendment to remove
Well,
that.
let's go, let's kind of go through that. I'm concerned about, particularly for the neighbors, the light going into the neighbors' area. I hate words, never, ever.
I use
no.
the word shall.
Oops.
That by lighting code, and I've lit many a parking lot as well as roadways, lightings now can be directed very easily, both with the fixture and the box in which it's enclosed in. Many.
I understand, but if you're, because of the small amount of buffer, I think we need to maximize that opportunity that no light spillage exists, no question.
Sure.
But I wouldn't want to set up the applicant for failure by saying, here we are 20 feet away, gosh, you know what? There's a shadow on my foot. By the way that you worded that causes me concern that there would be.
That's gonna be up to the staff to, and typically, this is very common in commercial and residential properties. This is very, very typical, and I'd probably defer to Angela. Maybe there's a better way of wording what I'm trying to describe.
Sure.
And.
I think we're on the same page, I'm just
Sure.
concerned about the.
And that's all I'm trying to do is come up with some kind of wording that and there's a special terminology, and I cannot remember about the photometrics, being certain value at some point of the property line, that there's 0-foot candles evident at the property line that would satisfy your shadow thing, and
Timers would cut it
well,
off.
but timers are also a
And
hazard.
I don't like timers.
Timers can create issues too,
Yeah.
unintended, security.
Yeah, I have I have a public safety issue with that, from both a crime aspect and my 17-year-old doing something that he shouldn't be doing in the parking lot.
Yeah. We do have the night sky ordinance, which pretty much covers spillage and foot candles,
Yeah.
you know,
So
foot
I-
candles
I-
at the property line and all of that.
So are you comfortable with how how the?
Let me read again
condition
what
was
I
stated?
said was, lighting of the new parking lot shall be directed away from the western property. Number two, the second lighting point was lighting from the fixture on the new parking lot shall not leave this site.
Yeah,
In other
Those, I
words,
mean, those are 2 points that are in the night sky ordinance.
okay.
they are.
Yeah.
And that's how it
So-
works. Okay, then my point is.
So do we even need to mention it, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Probably not.
They have to abide by the night sky ordinance.
They just have to abide by it. Perfect.
So we don't need to put that in there?
You know, I mean, it's redundant, but yeah.
Yeah, leave it. You've already made this thing up.
Okay.
If it's the same wording, then
Yeah.
we're all, then
Sure.
we're good.
Any other discussion?
Sorry?
If you make an amendment.
Oh, I have to make an amendment? So let me, propose that we modify your.
Well, let me
amend-
mention one more thing, if I
Sir,
may.
please.
Again, I don't have a problem with the parking in the new parking lot area. If that's not something the board has a big problem with, I would be glad to take that out. The only thing I think you're saying is, if you don't want commercial, how should I say, commercial logoed vehicles left parking,
Commercial licensed.
commercial licensed, would it matter if I had a sedan? In other words, if
Here's what I don't want anybody getting, if I leave a car, I have a car actually at my wife's building right now, okay, because I had to get around a car.
sure,
So it's parked there overnight.
okay,
It's,
okay.
So what you
it's
say
an
is no
SUV.
commercially licensed vehicles.
That's my suggestion.
I mean, we just didn't want, you know, heavy pickups and bulldozers and
Right,
that sort of thing.
yeah.
All right, so no commercially licensed.
Or you can just, I would just say commercial, and let that be interpreted appropriately.
Well, but if you say license, I think that.
Okay,
that
I'm fine
makes-
either way.
So you have to make both those amendments to get them.
Can I ask, you said black floorboard.
Why I said black, the present fence that's out there now is painted black. So that's why I went with black.
Right.
Now, the paint that's on the fence now probably needs to be repainted, but it was black, and that's why what I didn't want is a white fence, which I thought would only make it more dramatic to the property, and a black will just blend in, and white or any other color may not blend in as easily. So black is why, that's why I chose black. Simple as that.
I have to make, so,
And the welded wire to keep trash from blowing
No, that I understand.
onto the adjoining property. So that's the other reason why I put the welded wire. So that way, there'll be one less complaint.
right, I'm with you. So,
Okay.
let me propose an amendment, if I may, that we strike the first point of the pervious material as a pavement
Strike that all together.
altogether, and then modify no overnight parking to no overnight commercial licensed parking.
Do we have a second?
Licensed
Licensed vehicle parking.
But we're also going to delete the lighting thing?
No.
No, because it mirrors the night sky. And just saying,
redundant.
it's redundant,
And
so no harm, no
emphasizes
foul.
the public input. I would second your amendment.
Thank you.
We have an amendment to strike. The new parking area should be made of pervious material, and to add no overnight parking by licensed commercial vehicles. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Pass unanimously. We have a motion and a second to approve V14-012 to reduce the 50-foot buffer to 10 feet in order to add parking with the following conditions. The parking, tree, lot, island, buffer planning, etc., to meet ordinance requirements, landscape plans per the approval of the city arborist, buffer area around the revegetated parking in order to provide screening for the adjacent property, as well as Hickory Flat Road, buffer planning plan per the approval of the city arborist, a 5-foot high 4-board black fence with welded wire on the west property line, and that the new lighting be directed away from the western property, and that the lighting from the fixtures on the new parking lot shall not leave the site, and no overnight parking for licensed commercial vehicles
In the new parking lot area.
in the new parking lot area.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
without having you needing to reread all that, I think we should consider an amendment to reflect this drawing as part of the proposed change.
The reason I didn't make that is because I think the arborist and them have some discussions about parking islands and other things, and I just felt like it's easier to let it work out. That's where the 19 spots are gonna be, again, what they've asked for is to reduce the 50-foot buffer to 10 foot in order to add parking. So that's, to me, defining where that location is. So that's why I didn't add that. And maybe we could say the 50-foot reduction is in the western property line at a point 60 feet, or however you want to say it, but I think there's a little bit more work that needs to be done on this plan. There's
I agree that
handicap
there may be
spots
some
and there's
impact to
islands.
and handicap, however.
And they may have to move it further out to get the proper number of spaces because of handicap. So I didn't want to constrict them. I thought that overall, the intent was for parking in this western area, and that's why I left it like I did. And believe me, I debated about that.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, I didn't say that.
Okay.
And one thing I do want to say is, do I need to go into why I'm making, okay.
So we have a motion and second as read. All in favor of approval, raise your right hand. Opposed, same side. It passed unanimously. Good luck.
We have 13.
V14-013. Angela, would you like to present?
Mr. Chair, let's see, 100 Hopewell Grove Drive, again at the DRB. The DRB suggested some options to the applicant.
I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen.
The DRB suggested some options and suggestions for some more information. So the applicant is going back to talk to their contractor to put some more information together for me, and so we would like to defer this until next month.
Do we have a motion to defer?
Motion to defer V14-013 to the next meeting.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
Any discussion? We have a motion and a second to defer V14-013 to the August 2014 meeting. All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same side. Passed unanimously. Consideration of appeals.
So were you here for that last case?
No, that's Brad.
Oh, never mind. I'm good. I'm being told I'm good. Never mind. I don't know who Brad is, but okay. Huh?
Consideration of
Okay.
appeals, none. Any old business?
I have none.
Any new business?
I have none.
Need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We need a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of motion to adjourn, raise your right hand. Opposed, same side. Pass unanimously.